Billionaire invites Black Maid's daughter to play chess for fun. He didn't know she is child genius. It was barely past 9 o'clock in the morning when Angela Brooks arrived at the Caldwell estate. The air was crisp, touched with early spring, and the sun filtered through the towering oaks surrounding the mansion. Angela rarely worked weekends, but this Saturday was an exception. The housekeeper had fallen ill, and the billionaire Jonathan Caldwell had requested minimal staff for a discreet meeting later that afternoon. Angela, reliable as always, agreed. With no one to watch her daughter, she had brought along 10-year-old Naomi. Angela hadn't planned for Naomi to do anything more than sit quietly in the kitchen or perhaps read in the staff lounge. The girl was quiet, thoughtful, and uncommonly mature for her age, traits that had both amazed and worried Angela over the years. But when they arrived, the usual bustle of the household was notably absent. No groundskeepers shouting instructions, no chef preparing elaborate meals, just silence and the occasional chirp of birds overhead. Angela led Naomi through the back entrance and into the kitchen. "Stay here, sweetheart. Don't touch anything." "I'll be close," she said, smoothing her daughter's hair. Naomi nodded. She pulled a worn paperback from her backpack, already absorbed in its pages before her mother disappeared into the laundry area. After a few minutes, Naomi set the book aside. She wandered, barefoot, through the gleaming hallway that led to the garden. Something pulled her forward, a feeling, maybe, or just the scent of fresh grass and blooming azaleas. The garden was massive, structured with trimmed hedges and marble statues, but her eyes caught on something simpler, a small table beneath a white pergola, with a chessboard resting at its center. She walked toward it, cautiously at first, then more confidently. The pieces were already arranged, mid-game. Someone had abandoned the match halfway through. Naomi tilted her head, studying the position. The black bishop was poorly placed, and the white knight was in a dangerous spot, one that made her frown. "What would I do?" she whispered to herself. "Move the rook," a deep voice said suddenly behind her. Naomi froze. She turned to see a tall man approaching, elegant, silver-haired, dressed casually in slacks and a navy sweater. Jonathan Caldwell. She recognized him from the few photos that hung near the service entrance. Her mother had warned her never to speak to him unless spoken to first. And now, here he was. "I didn't mean to," Naomi began, stepping back. But Caldwell raised a hand gently. "You're Angela's daughter, aren't you?" His voice was calm, measured. Naomi nodded. "What's your name?" "Naomi." He smiled, only slightly. "Nice to meet you, Naomi. Do you play?" She hesitated. "Sometimes. With my mom. Just for fun." Jonathan glanced at the board, then back at her. "Would you like to play?" The question took her by surprise. She looked behind her, as if waiting for her mother to call her back. When no voice came, she nodded. "Just for fun," he added, pulling out the chair opposite hers. Angela, who had returned to the kitchen for a brief moment, caught the scene through the window. Her heart jumped. She dried her hands and moved toward the door, uncertain of what she was seeing. Was that Naomi? Sitting across from Mr. Caldwell? In the garden, Naomi sat quietly, her fingers brushing the white pieces. "Do I go first?" she asked. "Please," Jonathan said, resting his chin on one hand. He seemed curious, even amused. Naomi moved her pawn forward 2 spaces. Jonathan followed, responding with a mirrored move. For a few minutes, there was silence. Birdsong, the faint hum of distant traffic, and the click of polished wooden pieces. He expected the usual, a child fumbling through basic patterns, opening herself up to simple traps. But Naomi played conservatively, watching, learning, adjusting. After 10 moves, he realized she hadn't made a single careless mistake. Angela stood in the doorway, hands clutched together, unsure whether to interrupt. She couldn't hear what was being said, but she saw the way Naomi leaned forward, how her eyes scanned the board with quiet intensity. And Jonathan, he wasn't laughing or patronizing her. He was concentrating. Naomi sacrificed a pawn. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. He shifted in his seat. The game continued. She castled early, defending her king. He responded with an aggressive queenside attack, but she countered with a bishop slide that forced him to reevaluate. He sat back, folding his arms. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked. Naomi shrugged. "Books." "Just books?" She nodded. "And apps." "On my mom's phone." Another few minutes passed. Then it happened. Jonathan made a bold move, too bold. Naomi took only seconds before executing a counter that trapped his queen. Jonathan blinked. Naomi didn't smile. She just waited, letting the game continue. 3 moves later, she said softly, "Check." He looked down. She wasn't wrong. Angela stepped forward, finally unable to resist. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm so sorry," she said nervously, "I didn't mean for her to." Jonathan raised his hand again, not in irritation but in thought. His eyes hadn't left the board. "Not at all," he said. "She's fascinating." Naomi waited, still. Jonathan moved a rook. Naomi moved her bishop. Jonathan hesitated. And then, with a calm that was almost unsettling, Naomi placed her knight. "Checkmate," she whispered. Jonathan sat back. Silence. Angela covered her mouth, embarrassed and apologetic. But Jonathan didn't seem humiliated. He seemed stunned. He looked at Naomi, truly looked at her. "Would you mind," he said slowly, "if we played one more?" Naomi looked at the chessboard, her hands folded in her lap, unsure whether she should agree to a second game. The silence between her and Jonathan Caldwell stretched for several seconds. The billionaire sat across from her, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, not one of amusement, but of genuine intrigue. It was not often, perhaps never, that he had been bested so swiftly, and certainly not by someone so young, so composed. Naomi gave a small nod. "Okay," she said softly. He reset the pieces with careful precision. This time, he offered her the black side. "Your turn to defend," he said, still watching her with a kind of amused curiosity. Naomi adjusted in her seat, her back straight, eyes narrowed slightly. She didn't smile. For her, the game was serious, not playful. From a discreet distance, Angela remained by the kitchen door, torn between interrupting and letting the strange scene unfold. She had never seen Mr. Caldwell interact with anyone like this, let alone a child. Let alone her child. Every few seconds, her eyes darted back to Naomi, making sure everything was okay. The second match began. Jonathan opened with a less aggressive formation this time, testing the waters, waiting to see how Naomi would respond. Her counter moves came with the same quiet decisiveness as before. 10 moves in, he realized with a tight breath that she wasn't just mimicking patterns. She was adapting. Reacting. Analyzing him. But this wasn't about winning anymore. It was about understanding her. "Do you play with your friends?" he asked, casually, halfway through the game. "I don't have many friends," Naomi said without looking up. "Most kids at school don't like chess. Or reading. Or quiet." Jonathan studied her face. It was blank, not bitter. There was no self-pity in her voice, just the stating of a fact. "Have you ever competed?" he pressed further. Naomi shook her head. "No money. And I'm not in a club." "Has anyone ever taught you formally?" "My mom tried. But she doesn't really play. She just learned enough to keep up." Jonathan took a long pause. He moved a piece. Naomi responded without hesitation. Another few moves and, again, he was losing ground. He began to lean forward more, elbows on the table, hands clasped under his chin. The second game ended even faster than the first. "Checkmate," Naomi said, her voice still calm. Jonathan exhaled slowly. Then he laughed, a deep, surprised laugh that echoed slightly across the stone path of the garden. "Incredible," he murmured. Naomi looked down. "I didn't mean to." "No, no," he interrupted, shaking his head. "Naomi, you don't need to explain. You didn't do anything wrong. You played like a professional." Angela finally stepped forward, no longer able to remain in the background. "Mr. Caldwell," she began, "I hope she wasn't out of place. I told her to stay inside, but—" "She's not out of place," he interrupted, still watching Naomi. "She's extraordinary." Angela faltered. It wasn't the kind of thing people said to her daughter. Naomi was often overlooked, too quiet, too smart, too strange. Teachers didn't understand her. Classmates ignored her. Even Angela, despite loving her deeply, had never truly grasped the full extent of what was going on behind those wide, observant eyes. Jonathan stood. "Naomi, would you like to see something?" Naomi looked at her mother. Angela hesitated, her protective instincts kicking in. But Jonathan turned to her gently. "Just the old study. I used to keep some chess materials there. Books. Maybe she'll find something interesting." Angela nodded slowly. "I'll come, too." Together, the three of them walked across the patio and into the west wing of the mansion. The halls here were older, less polished than the parts guests usually saw. Dust clung to unused surfaces, and the lighting dimmed slightly with each step. Jonathan stopped at a thick wooden door, took a key from his pocket, and unlocked it. The hinges groaned as the door opened, revealing a large room lined wall-to-wall with bookshelves, cabinets, and relics of past decades, antique clocks, faded photographs, old trophies. A large oak desk stood at the center, and beside it, a corner table with 5 high-end chess boards arranged in various stages of unfinished games. "This was my wife's room," he said softly, almost to himself. "She was a strategist. A chess player. Used to host small tournaments here, long ago." Naomi stepped inside, her eyes widening not in excitement, but in deep, silent recognition. She approached the bookshelf slowly, her fingers brushing the spines of titles in Russian, German, and English, Grandmaster Studies, Annotated Matches, Forgotten Opening Theories. She pulled out one book at random and opened to a diagram. Then another. She flipped through pages with a speed that suggested more than familiarity, almost hunger. Angela stood near the doorway, watching, unsure what to say. Jonathan walked over to the computer in the corner and tapped a few keys. "It still works," he muttered. The machine came to life with a soft hum. On screen, a chess engine interface loaded. "Ever played against a program like this?" he asked Naomi. She shook her head. "Want to try?" Naomi stepped forward. Jonathan pulled up a chair. "It's one of the best. I use it to train sometimes." "You'll probably lose," he said, almost playfully. Naomi didn't respond. She clicked through the settings, adjusted the difficulty, and began. Angela watched the screen nervously, not understanding a thing. But within moments, she noticed the pattern. Naomi wasn't losing. Not easily, at least. Her face remained unreadable, eyes flicking across the virtual board, hands poised. Jonathan leaned closer, expression unreadable now. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. A sudden beep. "Checkmate," Naomi said again, quietly. Jonathan looked at the screen. The program displayed the final position, frozen in digital surrender. "That's not possible," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That level. That's near master level. At least." Naomi backed away from the desk, suddenly unsure of herself. "I just saw it. The pattern." Jonathan was silent for a long time. Then he turned to Angela. "She's not just talented. She's exceptional. You have no idea what this means." Angela crossed her arms. "I have some idea. But I've never had the chance to prove it." "Well," Jonathan said, his mind already working, "maybe it's time we change that. He turned back to Naomi. Would you be interested in playing a real game? Against real players. Not just me. Not just a computer. Naomi looked unsure. Like, a tournament? No, he said. Not yet. I have a private club. We meet every month. Former champions, CEOs, retired professors. Very informal. But serious players. Next weekend, we're meeting at the old conservatory downtown. I'd like to invite you. Angela's eyes narrowed. You want her to play with your rich friends? Jonathan didn't blink. I want her to play with people who will underestimate her. Angela stared at him. Naomi looked up. Can I? Jonathan smiled. If your mother agrees. Angela hesitated. She didn't like the idea of her daughter being put on display. But something in Naomi's face, something resolute, something eager, made her pause. Naomi whispered, I just want to see what I can do. Angela sighed, looked at Jonathan, then finally nodded. Fine. But I'm going with her. Of course, Jonathan said. She doesn't go anywhere without you. That much is clear. Naomi turned back to the bookshelves and pulled out another worn volume. She opened to the first page and began reading right there in the middle of the room, as if time had stopped. Jonathan watched her for a moment longer, then stepped away, already making calls in his head, already planning something much bigger than an afternoon game. And in the silence of that forgotten room, the first true door of Naomi's future opened wide. It was 7 o'clock in the evening when the Caldwell chauffeur pulled up to a modest two-story house on the south side of Bridgeport. Angela stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching nervously as her daughter stepped out of the sleek black car, clutching a thick hardback book to her chest. Jonathan had insisted on sending them home with a driver, but Angela had not ridden along, her pride was still too raw for that. Naomi climbed the steps and looked at her mother. I didn't even finish one shelf, she said, almost apologetically. Angela opened the door. Inside. Shower, dinner, bed. Naomi didn't argue. She rarely did. Later that night, after Naomi had fallen asleep with the book resting on her chest, Angela stood in the doorway of her room, staring at the quiet rise and fall of her daughter's breath. 100 thoughts ran through her mind. She had known Naomi was bright. Strange, even. But what had happened that afternoon went beyond what she could understand. And now this man, this billionaire, was offering to involve her daughter in a world she had never even imagined. Angela wasn't sure what scared her more, the risks ahead or the possibility that Jonathan Caldwell might be Naomi's only real chance. The following week passed with an uneasy stillness. Jonathan sent over a portable chessboard and a sealed envelope containing an invitation printed on embossed ivory paper, a private chess exhibition at the Easton Conservatory, scheduled for Saturday morning. Angela placed the envelope on the kitchen counter and didn't speak of it for 3 days. Naomi, however, spoke of little else. She practiced every evening, alone in the corner of the living room, whispering possible sequences, testing different openings and counterattacks. She had never had access to such a wide range of materials before, and it showed. Her games were faster now, more intuitive. She wasn't just learning positions, she was learning psychology, tempo, pressure. She started setting up false traps, testing if her imaginary opponents would fall for them. On Thursday evening, Angela finally gave in. Fine, she said quietly as she sat beside her daughter on the floor. We'll go. But you'll stay close to me, and the second someone treats you like some sort of novelty act, we're leaving. Naomi smiled. Not widely, just enough. Saturday came quickly. The Easton Conservatory was a building of old money and older tradition. Floor-to-ceiling windows, polished walnut floors, chandeliers that hadn't been cleaned in decades but still glowed with soft light. Inside, a dozen mahogany tables had been arranged in neat rows, each with a tournament board and timers. Around them stood men in tailored suits and women in tasteful blouses, murmuring in low voices. Gray hair, gold watches, expensive shoes. The smell of leather and old books hung in the air. Angela kept a protective hand on Naomi's shoulder as they walked through the entrance. Jonathan was already there, speaking with a group of older men by the far wall. When he saw Naomi, he raised a hand and made his way over. Today, he wore a simple navy blazer and a pair of jeans that made him look more like a professor than a billionaire. "I'm glad you came," he said warmly. Angela nodded once. "We don't plan to stay long." Naomi's eyes were scanning the room. Jonathan looked at her. "Do you want to walk around first? See who's playing?" Naomi pointed. "That man in the brown jacket, he's already lost 2 games in a row." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "How can you tell?" "He keeps pacing. His left hand twitches when he's nervous. He didn't even look at the last board when he left." Jonathan smiled again, but said nothing. Instead, he led them to a side table where refreshments were laid out, and offered Naomi a bottle of water. Moments later, the room's tone shifted. A short, wiry man with a thick accent clapped his hands twice and called for everyone's attention. "We begin now. Friendly matches. No clocks unless agreed. Challenge whoever you like. Remember, it's for the joy of the game." Naomi looked at Jonathan. "Go on," he said. "Pick someone." She pointed toward a younger man at the second table from the left. Mid-30s, tall, clean-shaven, wearing a tweed vest over a button-down shirt. "Him," she said. Jonathan raised both eyebrows, impressed. "He's a 2-time Ivy League champion." "Are you sure?" Naomi was already walking. Angela followed closely. The man smiled politely as Naomi approached. "Hi there," he said, clearly thinking she was someone's niece tagging along. "Can I help you?" "I'd like to play," Naomi said. He looked over at Jonathan, confused, then at Angela. "She's serious," Angela said flatly. The man hesitated. Then, with a small laugh, he gestured to the chair across from him. "All right then. Let's play." The pieces were set. Naomi chose black. The man made his opening move, Queen's Pawn, aggressive. Naomi responded instantly. She didn't hesitate, didn't second guess. Within 5 moves, the man began to sit up straighter. By the 10th move, his expression changed entirely. He adjusted his seat, frowned, and began taking longer between moves. A small crowd gathered. Whispers started. "She's playing well. She's controlling the center. No, she's baiting him. Look at her knight." Jonathan stood silently, arms crossed. Angela stood frozen. The match lasted 17 minutes. Naomi leaned forward, eyes scanning, and slid her rook into place. "Checkmate." Her opponent blinked at the board. Then again. Slowly, he nodded. "You're very good," he said, stunned. Naomi nodded once. "Thank you." A different man stepped forward. "May I?" And so it went. Another match. Then another. One by one, they sat across from her. Some smiled indulgently at first, others watched with narrowed eyes. But each one walked away the same, silent, defeated, shaken. Naomi wasn't cocky, nor particularly emotive. She simply played. Every move with purpose. Every decision grounded in a logic that seemed beyond her years. By the time she reached her 5th opponent, a former state champion, the room had gone almost completely quiet. Conversations had ceased. People stopped sipping their drinks. Phones had been silenced. Angela no longer stood beside her daughter. She sat now, hands clasped tightly in her lap, saying nothing. Jonathan stood a few feet behind Naomi, speaking to no one, a calm look on his face. But inside, he was no longer just curious. He was amazed. Naomi stared at the board. The former champion stared back. He adjusted his bishop. She captured a pawn. He shifted a knight. She offered a queen's sacrifice. Gasps followed. But the move held. 3 minutes later, checkmate. The man removed his glasses and leaned back. Unbelievable. Jonathan stepped forward. Would you like a break? He asked her gently. Naomi looked up. One more, she said. If that's okay. The crowd parted. One last opponent approached. A heavy-set man in his 60s with a cane and a piercing gaze. He didn't speak much. He simply sat. Arranged the board. Nodded. This match lasted almost 30 minutes. It was brutal. Every piece fought for. Naomi shifted in her seat for the first time. The man adjusted his tie. Angela gripped the arm of her chair. Jonathan didn't move. And then, Naomi launched a final sequence. 4 moves in rapid succession. The man's king trapped. Nowhere to go. He tipped his king. Silence. Then applause, light at first, then fuller. Naomi didn't smile. She stood, looked at her mother, then at Jonathan. Can we go home now? She asked. Angela rose immediately. Yes. Jonathan didn't try to stop them. But as Naomi walked past him, he leaned down and said softly, "That was remarkable." Naomi looked up. "It's just chess." "No," Jonathan said. "It's not just chess. Not anymore." She said nothing more. Just walked away, her footsteps steady and quiet. And behind her, the room buzzed, not with disbelief, but with the unmistakable electricity of having witnessed something they would remember for the rest of their lives. Sunday morning arrived with a pale, overcast sky. The scent of rain hung low in the air, and a soft breeze pressed gently against the windows of the Caldwell mansion. Inside, Jonathan sat alone in his expansive library, the same room he had opened for Naomi just a week earlier. He had not slept well. The memory of her final game the day before played in his mind like a film loop, repeating every move, every shift in tempo, every silent moment before her calculated strikes. He had seen prodigies before, at conferences, in investment pitches, even among young coders in Silicon Valley, but none quite like this. Naomi didn't perform. She executed. With poise. With precision. And perhaps most unsettlingly for him, without any apparent need to impress. A steaming cup of coffee sat untouched beside him. He stared not at his tablet or the pages of the chess book open on his lap, but at the empty space across the room. Naomi had taken his seat yesterday. And she had taken something else, his certainty. For the first time in a long while, Jonathan Caldwell had felt powerless, not in business or wealth, but in front of a 10-year-old girl who seemed to see 12 moves ahead without breaking a sweat. He stood, placed the book on the desk, and made a call. Angela answered after the 3rd ring. "Good morning," Jonathan said. There was a pause. "Is something wrong?" "No," he said. "Actually, I was wondering if you and Naomi would like to come over this afternoon. No matches. No crowd. Just a quiet day. I'd like to speak with her again." Angela didn't answer immediately. He could hear dishes clinking in the background, the faint hum of a television. "We're not used to all this attention," she said finally. "I understand. I promise, it'll be just us." She agreed reluctantly, and 3 hours later, the same black car pulled into the Caldwell driveway once again. Naomi stepped out first, dressed simply in jeans and a navy hoodie. Angela followed, less guarded than before, but still cautious. Jonathan greeted them personally at the door, without staff. "Come in," he said. "You're not guests today. You're company." Inside, the atmosphere was warmer. The fire in the den was lit, casting flickers of orange across the polished floor. Naomi's eyes wandered briefly before landing on the familiar chessboard in the corner. It hadn't been moved since last week. Jonathan led them to the sunroom, a glass-encased corner of the mansion filled with oversized chairs and an unobstructed view of the sprawling gardens. "I thought we'd talk here," he said, gesturing for them to sit. Angela accepted a cup of tea. Naomi declined. She stood near the edge of the room, watching birds flutter near the hedges. Jonathan sat down across from Angela. "She's not just talented," he said after a moment. "She's something rare. I've seen a lot of gifted individuals, but Naomi. She reads people on the board. That's not something you can teach." Angela nodded slowly. "She's always been like that. Even as a toddler. Solving puzzles, memorizing things in a glance. But we never had the means to do anything about it. She doesn't just deserve opportunity," Jonathan said. "She needs it. She needs to be seen." Angela's expression was unreadable. Naomi turned from the window. "Are you going to ask me to play again?" Jonathan smiled faintly. "Would you like to?" Naomi glanced at her mother. Angela raised her eyebrows but said nothing. Naomi stepped toward the table. Jonathan followed. They set up the board in silence. This time, Naomi chose white. "You know," he said as he sat down, "I used to think chess was just a game of logic. But lately, I think it's more like a mirror. It shows you who you are." Naomi placed her pawn on e4. "Then I hope you're not afraid of what you see." He laughed quietly. "Fair enough." The match began. Jonathan was focused this time. He had reviewed her tactics from yesterday. Prepared counters. Visualized traps. But none of it seemed to matter. Naomi didn't play the same way twice. Her style shifted mid-game, as if sensing his intention before he'd even touched a piece. She was faster this time, bolder. She moved with the kind of confidence that came not from arrogance, but from knowing she had nothing to prove. 10 minutes in, Jonathan was sweating. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. She trapped his bishop. He retaliated with a risky queen exchange. She accepted. And then punished him for it. Angela watched from across the room. She couldn't follow every move, but she didn't need to. The expressions on Jonathan's face told the entire story. By the 24th move, he had lost control of the board. By the 30th, he had only one playable option left. Naomi stared at the board and said, almost apologetically, "Check." He made his last move. Naomi reached out. Her knight glided to the edge. "Checkmate." Jonathan leaned back, rubbing his face with both hands. "I prepared for that," he muttered. "I actually studied." Naomi looked at him, genuinely curious. "You tried to predict me?" "Yes. But you're not me." Jonathan laughed again. Not bitterly, more like someone realizing they had underestimated a wave before it hit. Angela stood and walked over. She put a hand on Naomi's shoulder. "We should be going." Jonathan stood, still reeling. "Wait. Before you go." Angela turned. "I'd like to make you an offer. A real one." Angela crossed her arms. "I want to sponsor Naomi's training. Not just lessons or books. I mean formal education. Grandmaster coaching. Tournament entries. A proper path. The whole thing." Angela didn't speak for a moment. "What do you want in return?" she asked finally. "Nothing," Jonathan said. "Except to see what she can become if no one holds her back." Naomi looked up at her mother. Angela didn't answer right away. "Let me think about it," she said at last. Jonathan nodded. "Of course." As they left the mansion, Naomi held her mother's hand tighter than usual. "Do you believe him?" she asked. Angela looked at her daughter. "I don't know yet. But I believe in you." And for the first time since their very first game in the garden, Naomi smiled. Not a small smile. A real one. Quiet, certain, and just a little hopeful. Angela sat in the kitchen with the offer letter spread across the table in front of her. It was printed on thick, creamy stationery and accompanied by a separate contract, legally reviewed and personally signed by Jonathan Caldwell. He was offering everything: full educational sponsorship for Naomi at one of the top private academies in the country, professional coaching with a former international grandmaster, a travel fund for national and international competitions, even a discretionary living stipend for Angela herself should she need to reduce her hours at work to support her daughter's schedule. It didn't feel real. Naomi sat cross-legged on the living room floor, flipping through one of the books Jonathan had lent her. She wasn't reading casually. She was absorbing. Memorizing entire games. Whispering the notation under her breath like some kids whispered lyrics to songs. Angela ran her fingers over the paper again. She had barely slept the night before. Her thoughts had bounced from gratitude to suspicion to fear. She wasn't naive, she knew nothing in the world came without strings. But what strings were attached here? And why did Caldwell, a man who barely spoke to his own staff, suddenly care so much about her daughter? She folded the documents and called Naomi over. "Sit," she said. Naomi obeyed, eyes still full of the game she'd just been studying. "This offer," Angela said, tapping the papers, "means changing your school. Your schedule. Everything." "I know," Naomi said. Angela studied her. "Do you want it? Honestly?" Naomi hesitated. "Then, I don't want the attention. But I want the challenge. I want to see if I can really beat them. The best." Angela sighed. "And what if you can't?" Naomi looked down at the table. "Then I'll learn how." Angela leaned back. Her daughter wasn't a dreamer. She wasn't reckless. She wanted this for the right reasons. Not for fame. Not for praise. But for something much deeper. "All right," Angela said at last. "We'll meet with him tomorrow. You'll thank him. And I'll ask the hard questions." Naomi smiled faintly and got up without another word. The next day, they returned to the Caldwell mansion, this time not as guests, not as visitors, but as people considering a partnership. Jonathan greeted them in the study, a legal advisor present but silent in the background. Angela sat straight. "I need to understand why you're doing this." Jonathan nodded. "I figured you'd ask." "I've worked for you for 5 years," Angela continued. "You've never even asked my name until last month. Now you want to reshape my daughter's life." "You're right," Jonathan said. "I've kept my distance. That wasn't because I don't care. It's because I didn't know how to connect with people. Not since my wife passed." Angela's posture shifted slightly. Jonathan continued, his voice steady. "My wife loved chess. More than I ever did. She always wanted to start a foundation. Teach kids in underfunded schools. Give them access to something that's usually reserved for rich boys in prep schools and foreign academies. But she died before it ever began." He paused, as if choosing his next words carefully. "Watching Naomi play, it felt like watching something my wife would have believed in. Not just the skill. The way she carries herself. The way she thinks. It reminded me of what we lost. And what we still might be able to build." Angela looked at him, unsure whether to believe him entirely. "She doesn't need charity," Angela said flatly. "She needs respect. Structure. Support. If you're just doing this out of guilt." "I'm not," Jonathan interrupted. "If she were just good, I'd be impressed. But she's not just good. She's rare. And more than that, she's resilient. If I walk away now, someone else will find her eventually. Maybe someone who doesn't care if she's ready. Someone who'll exploit her talent for a headline or a tournament fee. I want to give her a safe launch. No cameras. No press. Just growth." Angela stayed quiet for a long moment. Then she turned to Naomi. "Do you trust him?" she asked. Naomi looked at Jonathan. "I think he knows what it's like to be alone with your thoughts." Jonathan gave a small nod. "Every day." Angela nodded slowly. "Then we'll do it. But I'm involved every step of the way. You have my word, Jonathan said. Over the next week, arrangements were made. Naomi was enrolled at Windermere Academy, a prestigious private school just outside Stamford, known for its academic rigor and small class sizes. Jonathan covered all tuition and fees through a newly created scholarship fund, named anonymously, designed to mask any appearance of favoritism. Her new coach was a 57-year-old Bulgarian grandmaster named Viktor Marinov, who had retired from competition a decade earlier after a series of health issues. He was skeptical at first. He had trained prodigies before, but most burned out quickly or had parents who pushed too hard. But after 2 sessions with Naomi, he called Jonathan directly. She is not just special, Marinov said. She is frightening. She listens more than she talks. And when she speaks, it's not to ask questions, it's to test theories. Like someone far older than 10. Meanwhile, Jonathan kept his promise: no press, no social media, no announcements. Naomi's progress was kept private, shared only between her, her coach, her mother, and Jonathan. Her name was never used in connection with the scholarship fund, and her school treated her like any other new student, except for the quiet awe with which some teachers began speaking of her abilities after the first math placement test. At home, things were still simple. Angela continued working part-time for the Caldwells, though Jonathan reduced her hours and quietly increased her pay. He never said anything about it, and Angela never asked. Naomi trained 3 times a week with Marinov and studied every night. Her bookshelf grew. Her posture changed. She still didn't have many friends. Windermere wasn't exactly a melting pot, but she didn't seem to mind. She had entered a rhythm now, one that matched the pacing of her mind. One evening, as the summer light faded outside their kitchen window, Angela sat with Naomi after dinner. "Do you miss anything?" she asked. Naomi shrugged. "Not really." Angela looked at her. "You don't get lonely?" Naomi picked at the edge of the table. "Not when I'm playing. Or studying. Or thinking." Angela exhaled. "I just want you to have more than the game." Naomi tilted her head. "Why?" "Because chess isn't life. It's just one part of it." Naomi considered this. "But it's the only part where I feel like I'm not pretending to be normal." Angela didn't know what to say to that. So she reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. And Naomi let her. For a long time, neither of them said a word. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the small clock above the stove. Outside, fireflies blinked in the bushes, invisible unless you were already watching. Naomi was not just rising. She was becoming. And while no one had seen it coming, not Jonathan, not her teachers, not even Angela herself, something far bigger than a scholarship or a game had already been set in motion. Late September brought with it a shift in the air, cooler winds, sharper light, and the distant scent of wood smoke drifting through the neighborhoods of Connecticut. At Windermere Academy, the leaves were beginning to yellow, framing the old brick buildings in strokes of gold and amber. Naomi adapted to the rhythms of the school quickly, if silently. She spoke little in class, but when she did, her answers were surgical, stripped of hesitation. The teachers, already warned by Jonathan's discreet letter of recommendation, treated her with caution, unsure whether to challenge her or stay out of her way entirely. Her classmates, meanwhile, didn't quite know what to do with her. Naomi didn't laugh at their jokes, didn't care about their gossip, didn't react to provocation. One girl in particular, Ava, tall, talkative, the kind of child who had grown used to being the smartest in the room, had tried to test Naomi's patience during a group assignment. "Do you ever talk, or are you just pretending to be mysterious?" Ava asked. Naomi glanced at her. "I talk when there's something worth saying." From that moment on, they didn't speak again. Viktor Marinov's lessons continued in the evenings, now moved to a private study on the 3rd floor of the Caldwell mansion. The room had been cleaned and restored, at Naomi's quiet request. She didn't like training in unfamiliar places, and Marinov, never one to argue with discipline, agreed. Jonathan kept his distance, never interrupting the sessions, though he often lingered just outside the door, listening. It was during one of these evenings, after a particularly intense sequence analysis of Fischer's 1972 World Championship win, that Naomi asked the question. "What's behind the red door?" Marinov paused, setting down his pen. "Which red door?" "In the hallway. The one near the west stairwell. It's locked." The Grandmaster glanced at her, then resumed writing. "Maybe it's just a closet." Naomi didn't press. But the question stayed with her. That Friday, Jonathan invited them to stay for dinner. Angela had grown more comfortable in the mansion by now, though she remained keenly aware of the social boundaries between them. Still, she accepted, and by 7 o'clock, they were seated in the formal dining room, a fire crackling behind the carved marble hearth, and plates of roasted vegetables, chicken, and herbed rice laid before them by a discreet staff. Angela kept her tone light as they ate. "You don't have to feed us every time we come here, you know." Jonathan smiled. "I don't do this for everyone. Consider it repayment for letting me into your daughter's world." Naomi pushed her food around quietly. Her mind, as usual, was elsewhere. After dessert, Jonathan stood. "Naomi, I'd like to show you something. If your mom is okay with it." Angela looked at Naomi. "It's your call." Naomi nodded. Jonathan led her through the main hall, up a flight of stairs, and down a wing she hadn't explored before. The air was different here, colder, older. The carpets were darker, the paintings more abstract. Finally, they stopped before a large wooden door, painted deep red, with a brass handle worn smooth. "This was my wife's private office," he said. "I haven't opened it since she passed. Until now." Naomi said nothing. Jonathan unlocked the door and pushed it open. The room beyond was a time capsule. Books lined the walls, floor to ceiling, some in English, many in Russian, German, French. A long desk sat in the center, cluttered but organized. Notes in looping cursive, faded photographs, a half-empty mug with a chipped rim. Beside it, a chessboard made of black marble and white onyx, the pieces set mid-game. Naomi stepped inside slowly. It was the smell that struck her first, old paper, dried ink, and something faintly floral. She walked past the desk and stopped in front of the chessboard. Without thinking, she adjusted two pieces. "You knew this position?" Jonathan asked, astonished. Naomi nodded. "It's a variation of the Catalan opening. Whoever played black panicked. They overextended the queen side too early." Jonathan stared at her. That was her board. She used to practice late into the night. Sometimes she wouldn't sleep until dawn. Naomi wandered toward the far wall, where several framed clippings and photos were mounted. In one, a young woman, clearly Jonathan's late wife, stood holding a trophy, smiling at the camera. Behind her was a banner, Women's International Chess Invitational, 1993. "She was strong," Naomi said. Jonathan nodded. "And stubborn. She taught me everything I know. I never beat her, not once." Naomi looked at him. "Did she want to teach kids?" He turned toward the window, his voice lower now. "Yes. That was her dream. She said chess was the only place where logic mattered more than money or skin or gender. She wanted to open centers in cities, sponsor young players, change the narrative." "What happened?" Naomi asked. "She died before she could start," he replied. "Car accident. I buried the project with her." Naomi walked back toward the desk. She picked up a small black notebook and flipped it open. Pages of handwritten notes filled the space, game strategies, annotated diagrams, even questions posed to herself in the margins. "Do you mind if I borrow this?" she asked. Jonathan smiled. "It's yours now." She clutched it against her chest and walked back to the chessboard. "Will you finish the game?" Jonathan asked her. Naomi nodded. "Yes." She sat down. It took her only 12 moves. "Checkmate." Jonathan laughed softly. "She would have loved you." Naomi looked up. Maybe you should still do it. Do what? Start the program. Jonathan tilted his head. You think people would care now? Maybe not yet, she said. But they will. He watched her for a moment, then walked over to a side cabinet and pulled out a sealed envelope. He handed it to her. Open it when you're ready. It's a proposal draft. Her original one. Never shown to anyone. Naomi nodded and placed it carefully inside the notebook. They left the room in silence. When they reached the main hall again, Angela was waiting, eyes narrowed. You good? She asked her daughter. Naomi gave a small nod. Yes. Angela turned to Jonathan. Thank you. For trusting her with that. He said nothing, only gave a nod in return. That night, back in their apartment, Naomi stayed up late reading the notebook by flashlight under her blanket. Page after page of brilliance. Diagrams, traps, philosophies of the game. And in the final pages, a mission statement, handwritten in shaky but determined script. Chess is not about being the best. It is about becoming better than you were yesterday. Everyone deserves that chance. Especially the ones the world forgets. Naomi stared at the words for a long time. Then she closed the notebook, rolled over, and stared at the ceiling, her mind not on victories or rankings, but on the door that had once been locked, and how, somehow, it had always been waiting for her. It was a chilly Saturday morning when the invitation arrived, not by courier or email, but through a hand-delivered envelope slipped beneath the apartment door. Angela found it first, mistaking it for another scholarship notice or school announcement. But when she opened it, her expression changed. Naomi, sitting at the kitchen table with her usual breakfast of plain toast and tea, watched her mother silently read the contents. Angela said nothing for a full minute. Then she looked up and handed the envelope over. Naomi scanned the elegant lettering, the old-fashioned serif type. Her name was printed at the top. Miss Naomi Brooks, you are cordially invited to participate in a special exhibition at the Hartford Chess Society Private Invitational, hosted at the Elmbridge Hall, this coming Saturday at 10 o'clock in the morning. The letter was signed by George Langston, a former state champion and current president of the Hartford Chess Society, a group known for its exclusivity and reluctance to modernize. Naomi set the letter down. Angela sat across from her. Did you know about this? Naomi shook her head. No. But I'm not surprised. Angela exhaled. Caldwell? Naomi nodded slightly. Probably. Angela leaned back in her chair. It says, private exhibition. That means no ranking, no official record, no media. Just a test, Naomi said. Angela's voice grew quiet. And if it goes wrong? Naomi didn't answer. She simply folded the letter, stood, and went to her room. That afternoon, Jonathan called. I know you received it, he said without preamble. Angela didn't bother with small talk. Are they ready for her? No, Jonathan admitted. But that's the point. Why her? She asked. Because they won't expect her. And because it's time they learn what's coming. Angela hesitated. She's still a child, Jonathan. She's more than that. That doesn't mean she has to carry your ambitions. There was a pause on the line. Then, you're right. I'll let her decide. Angela hung up. But Naomi had already decided. For the next 6 days, she trained harder than ever. Marinov pushed her into long endgame exercises, complex positional puzzles, rare opening deviations. He drilled her with a speed clock, forcing her to move faster without sacrificing precision. She is learning to fight blind, he told Jonathan after a session. Not just calculate. She senses pressure. She smells weakness. I haven't seen that since the Kasparov years. At home, Angela hovered more than usual, worried Naomi was slipping into something she couldn't escape from. But Naomi remained centered. Focused. Not anxious, not overly driven, just calm. She wasn't training to win. She was training not to break. On the day of the exhibition, they arrived at Elmbridge Hall just before 10 o'clock in the morning. The building, a refurbished estate with marble columns and a stained glass dome, stood like a monument to old New England elitism. Inside, the atmosphere was hushed, reverent, and cold. Several rows of polished tables had been set in the main chamber, with tall-backed leather chairs and velvet ropes separating the players from the dozen or so observers allowed to attend. Naomi wore a navy blazer and black slacks, her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. Angela walked beside her, shoulders squared, chin lifted. They were greeted at the entrance by a tall, pale man in his 60s. "Mrs. Brooks. Miss Naomi. Welcome. I'm George Langston," he said with a clipped tone. "Mr. Caldwell has spoken highly of you." Angela offered a tight smile. Naomi merely nodded. Langston continued, "We've arranged 5 matches today. All timed. No breaks. The last player is our current club champion. If at any point Naomi wishes to forfeit, she need only say so." Naomi stepped forward. "I won't." Langston gave a small, amused smile. "We shall see." The room settled. The observers took their seats. Naomi was led to the first table. Her opponent was a middle-aged professor from Yale, glasses perched low on his nose, a soft, condescending smile on his face. He offered his hand. Naomi shook it briefly, then set her eyes on the board. The clock began. Within 8 moves, the professor's expression changed. He began muttering under his breath, taking longer between decisions. Naomi leaned slightly to the right, eyes tracking every shift. She captured his knight on the 12th move and sacrificed her queen on the 15th. He hesitated. Then took the bait. Naomi launched a quiet offensive with her rooks. Checkmate in 20 moves. The crowd murmured. No time to celebrate. She was ushered to the second table, where a woman in her 40s waited with crossed arms and an air of mild disdain. She opened with a Sicilian defense. Naomi mirrored it with a rare line from one of her midnight studies. This game took longer, 33 moves, but the result was the same. The woman tipped her king in silence. Langston watched from the edge of the room, arms folded. He did not smile. Naomi wiped her palms once on her pants before sitting at the third table. Her third opponent, a retired investment banker, smiled warmly, as if she were about to entertain a child. Within 10 minutes, his smile was gone. He lost on time. The fourth match brought a different kind of challenge. A silent man in his early 30s, eyes sharp, posture still. He opened aggressively. Naomi slowed her pace. They danced across the board for nearly 45 minutes, tension building with every turn. Naomi adjusted. Shifted. Calculated. But on move 36, she made a mistake. A small one. A single pawn pushed too early. The man seized the opening. Naomi recovered. Redirected. It took 15 more moves, but she turned it around. Checkmate. He looked at her, stunned. "You saw that coming?" Naomi nodded. 3 moves after I made the mistake. He stood without another word. The final table waited. Langston himself stepped forward. "Shall we?" he said, removing his jacket and loosening his cuffs. Angela's back straightened. She had not been told he would be the final opponent. Naomi sat without flinching. The clock started. Langston played with grace, experience, and surprising aggression. He knew how to bluff. How to bait. Naomi responded not with tricks but with quiet pressure, forcing him to retreat again and again. The match stretched past an hour. The observers leaned forward. Langston captured her rook on move 42. Naomi sacrificed her bishop on move 43. Then came a long silence. Langston hovered his hand over his queen, hesitated. Moved. Naomi pounced. 4 moves later, checkmate. Langston sat back, expression blank. The room erupted, not in applause, but in silence, a reverent, almost fearful silence. Naomi looked up at him. "Thank you for the game." He gave a single nod. "You are extraordinary." Angela walked forward and took her daughter's hand. They turned to leave. Langston called after them, his voice softer now. "Miss Naomi. This won't stay secret for long." Naomi didn't look back. "It's not supposed to." Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds. Naomi looked up at the sky and squinted. Angela whispered, "How do you feel?" Naomi answered, "Ready." Monday morning at Windermere Academy dawned with a peculiar stillness. The corridors, usually humming with chatter, felt muted, as if Naomi carried a residual hush with her from the previous day's exhibition. Students passed her in the hallway, some glanced sideways, others stared, and a few whispered behind open lockers. The news had traveled fast, even though there were no official announcements. Rumors of a 10-year-old girl humiliating seasoned players by checkmate swept through the school, half-formed and eager to grow. Angela waited in the office during Naomi's first class, her phone tucked in her palm, fingers itching to scroll through news headlines or local blogs. But there was nothing yet. No posts. No announcements. Just the same guarded silence that had become Naomi's shield whenever her brilliance breached the borders of normal. She reminded herself that this was how it should be. Let people talk quietly. Let the wave build naturally. By mid-morning, Viktor Marinov had arrived at the mansion for their usual lesson. He found Naomi in the study, poring over one of the notebooks from Jonathan's late wife. He watched her for a moment, her fingers tracing the diagrams. She looked up when he entered. "Last week," she said quietly, "they underestimated me." Marinov sighed. "And you reminded them not to." Naomi closed the book. "Can we review the move after the bishop sacrifice I used against Langston?" "Yes," he replied, lifting the board between them. But his voice shifted. "Something else happened." Naomi tilted her head. "The head of the Hartford Chess Society called me yesterday evening. He wants you to give a demonstration, live, on local television." Naomi frowned. "Television? Not national. But regional. They want to feature local talents. They find stories of youth and genius compelling." Naomi's gaze dropped to the board. "I don't want that." Marinov nodded. "Neither do I. But they want it." Angela arrived then, appearing at the doorway. She had overheard. Naomi turned to her, eyes wary. Angela closed the door behind her. "We're not agreeing to anything yet," she said, voice firm. "Not without thinking." Naomi nodded. She didn't want to evade progress, she just didn't want to be paraded. The day stretched itself across schoolwork and unspoken tension. Naomi's performance in calculus was unaffected, she still answered every question before the teacher could finish phrasing it. But lunch and recess brought hushed stares and speculations. That afternoon, Angela and Naomi returned to the Caldwell mansion for another lesson, but this time with Jonathan present. He guided them upstairs to the forbidden study, where Jonathan's wife had once planned her foundation. Naomi sat near the window, notebook open, but distant. Jonathan cleared his throat. "I hear people are talking about you already," he said. Naomi looked at him. "It's just kids." Jonathan shook his head. "More than that. Teachers. Parents. Even investors." Angela frowned. "We're not interested in fame." Jonathan folded his hands. "I know. Let me ask a question. Do you want to inspire, or just win?" Naomi stared at the chessboard between them. It held dust from disuse, and she reached out to erase a smudge. "If inspiring helps me become better, maybe." Jonathan's expression softened. "Then there's a way to control it," he said. "You dictate how, when, where. Not them." That evening, they met at home to discuss terms. The local network offered a half-hour segment, a pre-recorded feature with Naomi playing a simultaneous games against multiple club players, commentary, the works. No studio lights. No audience. Just Naomi, her mother, and Victor in the background. Angela listened, arms crossed, expression cautious. "It's controlled," Jonathan said. "You can review it before it airs. There's no live feed. And you decide what questions they ask." Angela nodded slowly. "We'll consider it." Naomi looked at both of them. "Only if I can play all the games blindfolded." Jonathan's eyes lit up. "You'd like to try that?" Naomi shrugged. "Only if it's friendly. And only if I can say no to the camera." Angela pressed her lips together. "We'll negotiate." Jonathan smiled. "That's all I'm asking." The next day, school brought a new challenge. Ava, the chatty classmate, approached Naomi during their literature class. "You're really a genius, huh?" she said, voice low. Naomi looked her straight in the eye. "I just learn quickly." Ava blinked. "Lucky." Naomi replied, "Maybe." Ava paused. "Want to hang out after school?" Naomi considered it. Angela, waiting at the gate later, watched her daughter's shadow fall long in the afternoon light. "Did you agree?" she asked. Naomi gave a small nod. Angela exhaled. "Just be sure they deserve your time." This was the crossroads, Naomi stepping beyond the board into the world's gaze, but still holding the pen that would write the terms. The hush around her presence carried both the weight of expectation and the promise of possibility. She had altered the rhythm of every match she played, and now, slowly, gently, she would learn how to guide the rhythm of her own story. The autumn sun was setting when Jonathan Caldwell stood in the main hall of his mansion, staring at a dusty portrait of his late wife. The golden frame caught the last rays of light as if reflecting a truth he had long buried. Her eyes, calm, analytical, impossibly knowing, seemed to follow him as they always had. But tonight, they stared past him, towards something else. Or someone else. That afternoon, Naomi had completed her first televised demonstration. She had sat quietly at a large table in the Easton Historical Library, flanked by 5 boards, 5 opponents, 5 clocks. She wore a simple black blindfold. Her voice, low and unwavering, called out each move with surgical precision. She won every game. The footage, still under review by the network, would be edited down to a 20-minute segment. No name had been released. No camera had shown her face. But the room had been filled with observers, scholars, teachers, private investors, and whispers had already begun to spread outside Connecticut. What they saw was not a novelty. Not a trick. It was the real thing. After the event, Naomi declined interviews. Angela stood by her side the entire time, brushing off attempts to draw her into the spotlight. Viktor Marinov, when asked for comment, gave only one sentence: "She is beyond anything I have seen in 30 years." Jonathan had driven home in silence. And now, he stood in the shadow of a memory. He pulled open a drawer in the side table beneath the portrait. Inside was a slim folder, one he had not touched in nearly a decade. It contained old clippings, foundation notes, speeches never delivered. There was a photo from 2002, his wife at a community center in Brooklyn, surrounded by children. Beside her stood a younger woman, one he hadn't remembered until now. A name was scribbled in blue ink on the back, Angela B. Jonathan stared at it, stunned. He carried the photo to his study, pulled up his archived records, and began digging. His wife had indeed launched a pilot program before her death, small, underfunded, almost forgotten. 1 neighborhood library. 1 box of chess sets. 1 instructor. And 1 name kept appearing in the attendance logs, Angela Brooks. She had been a volunteer. He sat back in his chair, the pieces of memory shifting into place. Angela had never mentioned it. Not once. Not even during their long talks about Naomi's early years or her quiet brilliance. Jonathan felt a mix of disbelief and quiet guilt. guilt for never noticing, for never asking the right questions, for not remembering what his wife had once tried to build. And for not realizing until now that Angela had already carried the seed of this legacy long before Naomi had ever touched a chessboard. The next morning, he invited Angela and Naomi for tea, not at the mansion, but at a quiet cafe in downtown Stamford, where the windows overlooked a small garden and the crowd was light. Angela was cautious, as always. Naomi brought a travel-sized chessboard and set it up silently at the table. Jonathan didn't mention the photo right away. Instead, he watched Naomi move the pieces absently, creating a bored state from a memory only she understood. "I need to ask you something," Jonathan said, looking at Angela. "Did you know my wife before she passed?" Angela didn't flinch. She took a sip of her tea, then nodded. "I volunteered at one of her pilot programs. I was 19. Just trying to get out of the house. She was the first person who told me I was smart. Why didn't you tell me?" Angela looked him in the eye. "Because it wasn't about me. And because I didn't think you'd remember. You were never at those sessions." Jonathan leaned forward. "She wrote about you. Did you know that?" Angela blinked. "No. She said you were her favorite volunteer. That you had empathy for the quiet kids. That she thought you'd become a teacher or a mentor someday." Angela's expression softened. "I never knew that." Naomi paused her game, eyes moving between them. "So you already had a program like this before?" Jonathan nodded. "She started it. I let it die." Angela stared out the window. "But maybe it didn't." "Not really." Jonathan sat back. "Maybe not." The conversation shifted. They spoke of future plans. The television segment. Naomi's growing notoriety among chess circles. Offers had already started trickling in, schools asking her to visit, private sponsors wanting to attach their names to hers. But Angela remained protective. Naomi wasn't merchandise. She was a child. And a genius. And both of those things required care. "I want to build it again," Jonathan said quietly. "Her foundation. Properly this time. Scholarships. Community clubs. Training centers. In her name. And yours too, if you'll allow it." Angela met his eyes. "Only if it's done right. No handouts. No charity. Just opportunity." Jonathan nodded. That's what she wanted too. Naomi set her bishop down. "Can it be called ELO1? Jonathan looked at her. "Why?" She shrugged. "Because that's where everybody starts. Doesn't matter where you end up. Everyone begins at 1. He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. ELO1 it is. The rest of the week moved quickly. Naomi's story, still anonymized, began appearing on chess forums and niche blogs. Phrases like unidentified prodigy and 10-year-old phenomenon littered post titles. An editor from Chess Monthly reached out, requesting an exclusive. Angela declined. But not before asking Naomi one last time, "Are you sure this is what you want?" Naomi replied, "If I don't do it now, someone else will do it for me." Meanwhile, Victor began preparing her for the regional junior qualifiers, her first official tournament with national recognition on the line. It would take place in Boston, just a few weeks away. A win there would mean eligibility for international junior competitions, including an invitational in Spain. The Real circuit. The real players. The pressure was mounting. At school, more students approached Naomi now, some curious, some envious, some just trying to attach themselves to her rising star. She remained distant, but polite. Her circle stayed small. That Friday afternoon, after chess club, Ava approached her again. "My dad says you're probably just using AI apps to learn moves. Says you're not doing anything special." Naomi looked at her calmly. "Then he should sit across from me and test it himself." Ava didn't have a response. That night, Angela sat beside Naomi on the couch, watching her study yet another Grandmaster match. "You're not scared?" Angela asked. Naomi didn't look up. "Of what?" "Failing. Being wrong." Naomi finally met her mother's gaze. "Being wrong is how you figure out what's right." Angela smiled, but only slightly. Outside, the wind rustled the last yellow leaves from the trees, and Naomi pressed her pencil to the page, drawing a perfect replica of a 24-move endgame she'd seen once, 2 years ago, in a borrowed book. Everything was aligning now. And far beyond the lines on the board, the past and future were beginning to mirror one another, perfectly in sync. The letter arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. Angela was sorting laundry when she heard Naomi call from the door, the brown envelope already in her hands. There was no return address, just Naomi's full name written in an elegant serif type across the front. The weight of the envelope told Angela it wasn't ordinary. Naomi held it carefully, her fingers lingering at the seal, waiting for permission. Angela nodded. "Go ahead." Inside was a formal letter of invitation, printed in clean, minimalist black on white stock. It was from the Hawthorne Academy for Advanced Learners, one of the most elite institutions in the country. A place reserved for the children of diplomats, tech giants, and Nobel laureates. Notorious for its rigorous admissions process and even more for its eye-watering tuition. Attached to the letter was a second document, a full scholarship offer, covering tuition, housing, materials, travel expenses, and a monthly stipend. Angela stared at the pages, rereading every word. The offer was signed personally by the school's headmaster. And in the margin, written by hand, was a brief message. Jonathan Caldwell spoke of her potential. But it is her record that convinced us. We would be honored to provide the foundation she deserves. Naomi looked up. "Would I have to leave?" Angela nodded slowly. "It's a boarding school. Upstate New York." Naomi said nothing for a moment. "Is Marinov coming?" Angela exhaled. "I don't know." They sat in silence. Later that night, Angela called Jonathan. He had already heard from the academy. Of course he had. "I didn't orchestrate this," he said, his voice quiet. "They reached out after the exhibition aired." Angela didn't answer immediately. "Why now?" "Because she's becoming too large for any single program to contain. This isn't just about her winning anymore. It's about preparing her to shape the field." Angela paced her narrow kitchen. "She's 10. I know. And they want to ship her off to an academy that treats children like commodities?" Jonathan didn't respond for a long moment. "She won't be treated like a commodity. But she will be tested. That place will challenge her in ways none of us can. You said you didn't want her used. This is how she gains leverage." Angela hesitated. "And what if she loses herself in it?" "Then we pull her out," Jonathan replied. "No deal is final." Angela sat down at the table. "She's still just a girl. She needs warmth. Stability." Jonathan's voice softened. "She'll have it. From you. From me. From Victor. We won't disappear just because her environment changes." Angela didn't give an answer that night. Instead, she sat with Naomi after dinner and watched her daughter read the proposal again, lips moving slightly as she took it all in. "You'd have your own room," Angela said quietly. "A full library. Tournament support. The best trainers." Naomi's eyes stayed on the paper. "Would I still get to come home? Every break. Every holiday. And whenever you need?" Naomi thought for a moment. "Would I still be Naomi?" Angela reached across the table and touched her hand. "Only if you choose to be." The next day, they met with Viktor Marinov in his study. Naomi handed him the offer. He read it in silence. When he finished, he folded the pages carefully and looked at Naomi. "This place, it's serious. They'll work you hard. They'll break your patterns. Make you start from zero. Naomi nodded. Good. Victor gave a slight smile. I will stay close. I can visit monthly if the academy permits it. We'll continue training remotely otherwise. Naomi looked at her mother. Should I go? Angela didn't answer immediately. Then, I think, it depends on why you want to. Naomi stared at the table for a moment, then said, because I want to learn how to win without hurting people. Angela blinked. Hurting? Naomi nodded. Sometimes I see their faces after I win. Like something cracked. I want to know how to beat them without breaking them. Angela wrapped her arms around her daughter. You go, she whispered. But you don't let them change what makes you gentle. Naomi buried her face in her mother's shoulder. By the weekend, the decision was made. Jonathan arranged a visit to the Hawthorne campus. They drove up early on Saturday morning. The school stood like a fortress of glass and stone on the edge of a wooded hill, surrounded by towering pines and meticulously groomed gardens. Inside, every corridor gleamed. The dormitories were private, modern, and lined with shelves of books in every room. Classrooms had digital boards, but also real ones, chess, Go, Othello, all lined up under portraits of champions from decades past. Naomi explored the library first. She stopped in front of a book she'd only seen referenced once, a limited edition volume on Karpov's positional intuition, written entirely in Russian. She traced the spine, eyes wide. A student named Daniel approached her. He was 11, tall for his age, with wire-frame glasses and a quiet, confident presence. First time? He asked. Naomi nodded. You're the girl from the article, he said. Naomi blinked. Which article? The one no one's allowed to share. You beat Langston blindfolded. Naomi looked down at the floor. You believe everything people say? Daniel smiled. No. But I do believe in patterns. He pointed to the book she was holding. That's the one with the Petrov defense trap analysis, by the way. Page 73. Naomi raised an eyebrow. You've read it? Twice. They stood there for a moment. Then Daniel said, I hope you come here. It'd be nice not to be the only one thinking 12 moves ahead. Naomi smiled slightly. Maybe I will. The following Monday, Angela signed the final documents. Naomi would begin in November. Jonathan offered to handle the logistics, transport, material prep, a formal press release to be issued only after her first month, with Naomi's name still protected under a pseudonym. Angela agreed. That night, Naomi stood by the window of their apartment, staring out into the quiet city lights. Mom, she asked. Yes? Will I still be yours if I become someone different? Angela rose from the couch, crossed the room, and wrapped her arms around her. You'll always be mine, she said. Even if the world doesn't understand who you are yet. Naomi leaned into her, the envelope still clutched in her hand. A proposal had been made. A door had opened. And this time, Naomi wasn't walking through it alone. November arrived, and with it, Naomi began her first weeks at Hawthorne Academy for Advanced Learners. The early mornings were still dark, the air crisp with approaching winter, and the drive through winding roads to the campus felt like entering another world, one of hushed hallways, stained glass corridors, and centuries of hushed scholarship. Naomi's arrival was deliberate and gradual. There was no fanfare, no flash of cameras, no social media buzz. Her name remained confidential in most circles, Student X in the press release, the new transfer from Windermere on school records. But for those paying attention, the tide had turned. Classes began. Theology and archaic languages in the morning, chess strategy and advanced mathematics after lunch. Naomi studied the Borgov opening and the Grunfeld defense alongside philosophical treatises on logic and ethics. Her dorm was small but comfortable, an elevated loft bed with a writing desk below, walls lined with chipped plaster maps of old chess masters' journeys, Kasparov's tour across Europe, Polgar's legendary matches, Karpov's silent endgames. Someone had added Brooks in pencil under a faded photo of Jose Raul Capablanca, although no one knew who. She made 2 tentative friends in the first week. Daniel, the boy from the library, was the first, then May, a girl from Hong Kong who played Go and studied fractal geometry. Neither pressured her. Instead, they offered quiet companionship, a shared tray at lunch, an invitation to a weekend reading circle, an offer to review the Academy newspaper before publication. Naomi accepted each, still cautious, still measured, but warmed by their consistent kindness. News of the anonymous phenom drifted into the public domain thanks to chess bloggers and parents in closed forums. Comments ranged from reverence, a prodigy unlike anything I've seen, to skepticism, probably AI-assisted, unverified, hype. For every supportive voice, there were others questioning motives, authenticity, provenance. A few journalists reached out to Jonathan, requesting interviews. Angela declined again, stating they were protecting Naomi's childhood. A handful of local reporters wrote speculation pieces. None broke the story, they only laid moss on its perimeter. At the Academy, Naomi's academic performance was impeccable but unremarkable in its perfection: perfect calculus, flawless Latin translations, flawless opening theory. Victor, observing remotely via video calls, expressed admiration and concern. "She's absorbing too much," he told Jonathan one evening. "Thinkers burn out." But in Naomi's dorm, she carried a small notebook of her own, not training logs, not openings, but lines of poetry, observations about light, and personal reflections. "My victories are only real when I feel the weight of every loss I might have suffered." It was personal, raw, human. One evening after training, Jonathan arranged a private call via encrypted video. He was in his study. Behind him, the portrait of his wife glowed in lamplight. "How's the transition?" Naomi looked up, her desk littered with annotated book margins. "Quiet. Still hard. But you're holding your space." Naomi paused. "It's different here. I don't have to prove anything to anyone yet." Jonathan nodded. "And that's good." 1 week later, conference day arrived. Seniors showcased projects in the Great Hall: a chess-inspired AI algorithm, an ethical code for competition, a sculpture of a queen carved from driftwood. Naomi's project was understated: a written manifesto titled Chess as Compassion, arguing for the moral dimensions of competition and empathy between players. She presented it quietly but spoke with conviction. By the time she sat down, there was applause, thoughtful, soft, but real. Outside in the hall, May tapped her shoulder and said, "That was beautiful." Naomi nodded. "I wrote it for them, who haven't had the chance to lose yet." Elsewhere, online, a video clip appeared, a grainy, amateur shot of Naomi moving pieces in a simul from her audition. It went viral almost overnight. The caption read, "Mysterious chess prodigy, age 10, cracks grandmaster tricks." Comments flooded in, teenagers tagging their friends, grandmasters speculating, parents debating whether this was brilliance or marketing. Jonathan and Angela watched together, silent. Naomi came home for a rare Thanksgiving weekend. There were mashed potatoes, sweet potatoes, green beans, laughter, yet comfort lay in normalcy. Naomi stepped into her family's modest kitchen and began cooking stuffing with Angela, teaching her a technique she'd picked up from a recipe she'd read. Angela said softly, "You can't hide forever." Naomi squeezed her mother's hand. "Maybe I don't want to hide. Just choose when." Jonathan looked at her across the table and said, "Then we tell them, on your terms. When you're ready." Naomi nodded and smiled, small and certain. After holiday break, the Academy newsletter published a profile titled, "Shadow Queen of Chess Emerges from Hawthorne." The name still withheld, but the admiration unmistakable. Victor forwarded the clipping to Jonathan. Jonathan sent it to Angela with one line, "She's becoming what she needs to be." Naomi returned to campus with renewed purpose. She typed into her manifesto, "Let them see. Not because I need them to, but because they need a mirror." Her name would be revealed soon. A trove of opportunities awaited: tournaments, interviews, mentoring programs. But for now, in the silent spaces between opening moves and final checkmate, she was regaining something deeper, ownership of both her mind and her story. In the hush around her brilliance, the world was learning not just to witness her genius, but to respect her as a whole person. And that, Naomi understood, was the most profound victory yet. It was late January when the official invitation arrived. Naomi was seated in the academy library, studying endgame theory from a set of Russian journals when Headmaster Wallace approached her table with an envelope in hand. He said nothing at first, only placed the envelope before her and waited. She stared at it for a moment before sliding her fingers under the seal. Inside were 3 items: a formal letter bearing the emblem of the International Junior Chess Federation, a list of ranked competitors for the upcoming European Invitational in Barcelona, and a prepaid flight itinerary in her name. She read it once. Then again. Then carefully folded the documents and whispered, "It's time." News of the invitation spread quickly through the academy. Hawthorne, ever discreet, issued no formal announcement, but the student body was abuzz. In the common room, theories flew like sparks: who she would face, what it meant for the school, whether the prodigy would finally step into the public spotlight. Angela received the call that evening. Naomi's voice was steady. "It's in March. In Barcelona. They want me to represent the United States under the junior category." Angela didn't answer at first. She was sitting at the kitchen table, a mug of tea cooling beside her. The silence on her end stretched. Naomi didn't rush her. Finally, Angela said, "Then we'll get your passport renewed. And I'll be there." Jonathan, informed shortly after, contacted the organizers directly. He declined press access. Naomi's identity would remain protected until after the match. No interviews. No pre-match pressers. Only the board, the clock, and the players. He booked a private suite for Naomi and Angela near the venue and sent a quiet message to Victor: "She's going to need you. Pack light." 2 weeks before the tournament, training intensified. Marinov flew in to work with Naomi in person. They occupied one of the academy's old seminar halls, working 12 hours a day, every day. Naomi studied each of the top competitors' game histories. She memorized their rhythms, their blunders, their instincts. One name on the list made her stop: Clara Roth, the reigning European under-16 champion from Germany. Undefeated in her last 32 matches. Known for her defensive durability and glacial control of tempo. Victor frowned when he saw the name. She plays like granite. Cold. Patient. Unshakable. Naomi looked at the screen. Then I'll need to learn how to crack granite. March came fast. Barcelona greeted them with cold winds and the sharp salt of the sea. The tournament hall sat in a converted opera house near the city's old district. High vaulted ceilings, velvet curtains, and floor-length mirrors gave the space a strange sense of grandeur and fragility. Naomi arrived with her mother, Victor, and Jonathan, who had flown in separately but remained respectfully distant. This was Naomi's stage now, and they all knew it. The days leading to the final match blurred into a parade of victories. Naomi dispatched her first opponent in 32 moves. The second fell in 29. The third tried a modern variation of the Caro-Kann and held her off for nearly 2 hours before succumbing. Each victory chipped away at her anonymity. By the semi-final, whispers of the American Shadow Girl spread among coaches, players, and organizers. Someone leaked a photo. It landed on a niche chess blog. Within hours, speculation threads appeared on Reddit and Twitter. Some accused the event of protecting a fabrication. Others claimed she was a synthetic talent, AI-trained, algorithmic, corporate-backed. The more Naomi remained silent, the louder the speculation became. Angela tried to shield her from the noise. But Naomi had already read the threads. That night, before the final match, she sat on the hotel balcony alone, listening to the ocean. Victor joined her after a while. He handed her a warm drink but said nothing. She spoke first. "They want me to be something I'm not. A myth. A symbol. Then remind them you're real, Victor said. Naomi looked out over the city. Tomorrow's not just a game, is it? No, he said softly. It's an introduction. The final match was scheduled for noon the next day. Clara Roth arrived in a black blazer, her long blonde hair pulled into a single braid. She nodded respectfully to Naomi before sitting down. Cameras clicked softly. The spectators in the hall numbered over 500, coaches, players, federation members, and media representatives. Angela sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Jonathan remained in the back, arms crossed. Naomi sat down without a word. The clock started. Naomi opened with pawn to e4. Clara responded with pawn to c6, Caro-Kann defense. Naomi had expected it. They danced across the board for 20 minutes in dead silence. Clara was everything Victor had warned, meticulous, stoic, deeply aware. She didn't rush. She didn't overreach. By the 20th move, the board was locked in a symmetrical structure, cold and uninviting. Naomi shifted in her seat, narrowed her eyes. She sacrificed a pawn on the queen's side. Clara declined the bait. Naomi pressed the bishop forward. Clara blocked it. Tension rippled through the hall. Angela leaned forward, barely breathing. Naomi did something unexpected. She began to break her own patterns. For the next 5 moves, she made no sacrifices, no traps, only positional strengthening. She tightened her defenses, as if drawing Clara in. Then she sacrificed a rook for a knight. Gasps followed. Clara paused for nearly 3 minutes before responding. Naomi's next move came in 6 seconds. Then another. And another. The pressure shifted. Clara's shoulders stiffened. Naomi whispered, "Check." Clara responded. Naomi moved again. "Check." Clara blocked. Naomi took the queen. Gasps. Clara, for the first time in her career, hesitated with her fingers trembling above the clock. 32 moves in. Naomi leaned forward and moved her bishop, pinning Clara's king in the corner. Checkmate. The room went silent. Then applause. Then rising applause. Then standing ovation. Angela wept quietly, hand over mouth. Jonathan didn't clap, he just stood frozen, filled with something that resembled reverence. Naomi didn't smile. She stood. Offered her hand. Clara shook it with grace. "You're not a myth," she said. "You're real. Too real." Naomi bowed her head slightly. "So are you." After the ceremony, a journalist approached Angela. "Can we publish her name now?" Angela looked at Naomi. Naomi answered for her. "Yes." And just like that, the world would finally know who she was. Not a rumor. Not a myth. But Naomi Brooks. A girl from Bridgeport. A daughter. A genius. And now, a champion. Spring settled in slowly across the East Coast. Trees budded along sidewalks, parks filled with warm-starved families, and the sky above Bridgeport bloomed into a clearer blue. But the season brought something else for Naomi Brooks, a shift that could no longer be ignored. She had come back from Barcelona no longer hidden, no longer protected by the safety of anonymity. Her name had crossed borders, transcended the niche circles of chess forums and entered the public arena. And this time, she didn't shrink from it. The first article came 2 days after her victory, a full-page spread in the New York Times under the title, "10-Year-Old American Shocks the Chess World in Barcelona." Beneath the headline was a photo, Naomi in her final stance before the checkmate, her face unreadable, the board a battlefield of cold brilliance. Within 24 hours, requests flooded in from every corner, ESPN, BBC, NPR, even late-night talk shows. Angela ignored most. A few, carefully selected, were passed to Naomi to consider. She chose one. It was an hour-long feature for 60 minutes, under the condition that no questions would focus on her father, whom she had never met, her neighborhood, or her racial background unless she brought it up herself. She didn't want her story rewritten as a struggle narrative. She didn't want to be pitted or praised for what she had survived. She wanted the conversation to center on her ideas, her discipline, her mind. The interview aired one Sunday night in April. Viewers across the country watched as Naomi sat in a quiet room with the host, her posture as straight as the queen on a chessboard, her eyes calm but charged. She answered questions about her training, her experience in Barcelona, and her perspective on winning. "I don't play to crush people," she said, voice even. "I play to test what's possible. Every person on the other side of the board is trying to become something too." The interviewer asked about the future. "I'm still learning," she replied. "But one day, I'd like to teach others how to think, not just how to win." That line went viral. Clips of her interview were shared by celebrities, athletes, educators. Politicians quoted her during speeches. The Department of Education reached out. Nonprofits asked her to speak at youth conferences. And amid the media storm, something else quietly began to form. The foundation. Jonathan Caldwell kept his promise. With Angela's approval and Naomi's input, they launched ELO1, a nonprofit dedicated to identifying and nurturing talent in underserved communities across the country. The organization's mission was simple but radical: to provide resources for critical thinking through chess, with training centers in public libraries, after-school programs, and mobile tournaments that traveled to rural and inner-city districts. Naomi's role was not ceremonial. She attended planning meetings. She reviewed curriculum drafts. She visited the first pilot program in New Haven, Connecticut, where she spoke not from a podium, but from a folding chair beside other kids, explaining not how to win, but how to stay curious. She played 5 boards simultaneously. She lost one. And she laughed, genuinely, for the first time in weeks. "I've been waiting for someone to beat me," she told the boy who did. Angela watched from the side, tears gathering in her eyes but not falling. Jonathan stood nearby, quiet, his late wife's notebook in hand. Victor returned to Bulgaria that summer but promised to return as soon as Naomi needed him. They continued lessons remotely, with Naomi now sending analysis notes instead of just recordings. Her notes were filled not only with diagrams and strategies, but questions. Big ones. Is there a difference between controlling a board and controlling yourself? Can a mistake still be brilliant? By June, the foundation had received over $4 million in donations. By July, ELO1 had launched in 5 states. And in August, Naomi was invited to give the keynote speech at the National Junior Logic Symposium in Washington, D.C. She stepped onto the stage before hundreds of students and educators, her blazer too big for her shoulders but her presence towering. She spoke without notes. "I was told, more than once, that I didn't belong at the table. That I didn't look like a champion. That I didn't smile enough. That I didn't act like other kids. For a long time, I believed them. I thought the silence inside me meant something was missing. But it wasn't missing, it was building." She paused. "What I've learned is this: you don't need permission to be excellent. You don't need to be loud to be heard. And you don't have to win to prove you matter." The standing ovation lasted nearly 3 minutes. Afterward, a young girl approached her backstage. "I don't play chess," she said shyly. "But I want to be brave like you." Naomi bent down and whispered, "Then you already are." Angela published an essay later that year, her first public writing, called The Game Behind the Game, which detailed not just Naomi's rise, but the quiet resistance required to raise a child like her in a world that rarely makes room for difference. In it, she wrote, "Genius is not rare. Opportunity is." Naomi was not a miracle. She was a mirror, reflecting back what we refuse to believe about the brilliance around us. By the year's end, Naomi had received personal invitations to train with the United States Chess Federation's Olympic development team. She declined, for now. She wanted to finish middle school first. She wanted to rest. She wanted to walk to class with May and Daniel, and spend Saturday mornings drinking orange juice on her dorm balcony, watching squirrels fight over twigs. She was still 10. 11, actually. Her birthday came quietly. Angela made her favorite lemon cake. They celebrated at home, just the two of them. No photographers. No attention. That night, Naomi lit a single candle and made a wish. When Angela asked what it was, Naomi only smiled. "Not yet," she said. Because even now, with the world behind her and a future stretching like an infinite board before her, Naomi understood that some things, like the final move in a perfect game, were better revealed in time. And as the pieces clicked into place, one after another, the world would remember her not just as the girl who beat the system, or the girl who taught chess to a new generation, but as something far more profound. A name that would never be forgotten. Naomi Brooks. The girl who changed everything.